There are some stories that never stop echoing, even years later. The silence around them feels heavy. In January of 2013, a 17-year-old student named Kendrick Johnson walked into Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia, and never walked out again. The next day, his body was found inside a rolled-up gym mat, his shoes placed neatly on top. His face, unrecognizable. Authorities called it a tragic accident, that Kendrick had climbed into the mat reaching for a shoe and got stuck. But almost immediately, something about that story didn't sit right. Not with his classmates, not with his community, and definitely not with his family. Because what they saw told a different story. A story of missing evidence, changed reports, and an investigation that seemed to close faster than it began. Over the next decade, the case of Kendrick Johnson would divide a town, draw national headlines, and expose the cracks in a system that too often fails to protect Black youth in America. This isn't just the story of a mysterious death in a Georgia high school gym. It's the story of what happens when a family refuses to accept silence and demands answers from a system that's not built to give them. This is the death of Kendrick Johnson. Before the story became a mystery, before the news cameras in Valdosta, there was just Kendrick. Kendrick Johnson was the kind of teenager every small town knows, the one with the easy smile, the one who seemed to know everyone's name. He was 17 years old, a three-sport athlete who loved basketball, football, and track. Friends called him KJ. He dreamed of playing college football, maybe even going pro one day. People who knew Kendrick say he was quiet but confident. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but he was the one people listened to. He loved to make others laugh. He respected his coaches, helped younger players, and often looked out for his sisters. His parents, Kenneth and Jacqueline Johnson, described him as their baby, someone who never left the house without saying, "I love you." He had a big personality, but a bigger heart. He was the kind of kid who still hugged his mom in public, who stayed after practice to help clean up, who didn't like seeing anyone left out. In Valdosta, a place where Friday night football still brings the whole town together, Kendrick was more than a player. He was a promise. But on January 13th, 2013, that promise was cut short. A normal day turned into a nightmare, and the answers that should have come easily never did. A day after he was reported missing, students were told to gather in the old gym. A group was playing basketball when someone looked down, and what they found inside of one of those rolled-up wrestling mats would change everything.
And it shows Kendrick walking in from the right side of your screen there. He's behind another student, and as soon as he runs out, you see that student disappears, and a couple of other students appear.
January 11th, 2013. It's a Friday morning at Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia. Students are back from winter break, heading into a long weekend. Kendrick's parents had noticed he didn't come home the night before. They called his friends, his coaches, even checked hospitals. By morning, panic was starting to set in. Kendrick wasn't the type to just disappear. At the school, classes went as usual. In the old gym, the one used mostly for storage now, a few students were playing basketball before class. One of them noticed something strange, a pair of white and orange sneakers sticking out of the top of a rolled-up wrestling mat standing upright. At first they thought it was a prank. Maybe someone hid their shoes. But when they looked closer, they saw what looked like blood on the edge of the mat. Then came the smell. A teacher was called in, then the administrators, and finally, the police. Inside the mat, upside down, was the body of 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson. He was wedged inside head first, his arms pinned to his sides. His face and chest were swollen. Blood had pooled at the bottom of the mat, soaking into the floor beneath. Sheriff deputies from Lowndes County quickly secured the gym. Students were moved out, and within hours, the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, the GBI, was called in. The initial theory came fast. Investigators suggested that Kendrick may have climbed into the mat to reach for one of his shoes, that he slipped, got trapped, and suffocated. But even in those first few hours, people were asking questions. The mats were heavy and rolled tight, too tight for a person to just fall into. And if he had been reaching for a shoe, why were his shoes placed neatly on top of the mat? Other students said the mats were stored upright, 6 feet tall. Kendrick was about 5'10". If he dropped a shoe, he could have easily tipped the mat over, so why climb inside? The school went into lockdown. The Johnson family got the call no parent should ever get. When they arrived, they weren't even allowed to see his body. In that moment, the official story was already being written. But the truth, whatever it was, hadn't even begun to be uncovered. From the moment Kendrick's body was found, investigators seemed eager to close the case. Within just 24 hours, the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office announced that there were no signs of foul play. No fight, no weapon. They suggested that Kendrick had accidentally fallen into the mat while reaching for a shoe and suffocated. But for Kendrick's family, that explanation did not make sense. They knew their son. He wasn't reckless. And he certainly wouldn't have crawled into a rolled-up mat to grab a shoe. The official story was that students often left their shoes or personal items inside the upright mats to avoid locker fees. But classmates disputed that. Some said they had never seen Kendrick do that. Others said the mats were stored tight enough that only an arm could fit through the opening. And then there were the physical details. Kendrick's body had severe bruising on his face. His eyes were swollen. Blood had pooled to the bottom of the mat, staining the floor beneath him. Yet investigators claimed there was no evidence of a struggle. Even the scene itself raised questions. A pair of black and white sneakers, not the orange ones Kendrick was supposedly reaching for, were found a few feet away, stained with what looked like blood. Another pair of shoes, believed to be Kendrick's, sat neatly on top of the mat, untouched. No one could explain how or why. When photos from the scene later surfaced, they told a story that didn't match the words in the reports.
The moments before Kendrick Johnson enters the gym. Look at what happens to the recordings from these 4 cameras in the gym. The time is recorded with the video. The first camera captures images from the start of the day until 12:04 p.m. Then, nothing. It picks up again at 1:09 p.m. There's consistent surveillance from the second camera until 11:05 a.m. Then it stops and picks up again more than 2 hours later at 1:15 p.m. The third camera also drops at 11:05 a.m. It picks up again at 1:16 p.m. And from the final camera, there's surveillance until 12:04 p.m., no recording for more than an hour, then it picks up again at 1:09 p.m.
I would absolutely expect there to be some record of that activity, and we don't have any here.
There were blood splatters on a nearby wall, small but visible. A pink and white tissue with blood on it was found on the floor. None of these samples were ever tested. The gym was not treated like a potential crime scene. No crime scene tape was placed until hours after Kendrick's body was removed. Students were allowed to walk freely in and out of the gym for nearly 2 days after his death. By the time GBI's autopsy was complete, the conclusion was already clear. The cause of death? Positional asphyxia. Accidental. Case closed. But when the Johnsons' family received their son's body from the funeral home, they were shocked by what they saw. The damage to Kendrick's face didn't look like suffocation, and when they ordered a private autopsy, the results would open a whole new chapter of this story. When the Johnsons received Kendrick's body, they immediately knew something wasn't right. The funeral home had cleaned and prepared his body for viewing, but the condition of his face, the swelling, the discoloration, it didn't look like suffocation. It looked like trauma. The family wanted answers the official autopsy didn't give them, so they hired an independent pathologist, Dr. William Anderson, to perform a second autopsy. And what he found would change everything. According to the private autopsy, Kendrick's death was not an accident. Dr. Anderson concluded that Kendrick died from blunt force trauma to the right side of his neck, consistent with being struck by an object or another person, not from being trapped in a mat. But there was something else, something even more disturbing. When Mr. Anderson opened Kendrick's body, his internal organs were missing. In their place was newspaper, stuffed to fill the cavity. The Johnson family was horrified. They immediately demanded answers from both the funeral home and the Georgia Bureau of Investigations. The GBI claimed they returned Kendrick's organs after the state autopsy, as required, and that the organs had been disposed of by the funeral home because they were too badly decomposed. The funeral home denied responsibility, saying they received the body that way. To this day, no one has been able to explain what truly happened to Kendrick's organs. When the news broke, the story exploded across national media. What was once considered an unfortunate accident had now become a full-blown controversy. CNN, NBC, and dozens of local news outlets descended on Valdosta. The Johnsons spoke publicly, demanded federal involvement, and called the case what they believed it was, a cover-up. Around the same time, surveillance footage from the school gym was released. But instead of bringing clarity, it only raised more questions. The footage showed Kendrick walking into the gym between classes. He's seen headed toward the mats, and then nothing. The next several minutes of the video appear missing or corrupted. Dozens of frames are out of sync, timestamps jump around, and key angles are blurred or blacked out. School officials claim the missing footage was due to different cameras recording at slightly different times, but the inconsistencies were impossible to ignore. How could a modern high school have cameras that glitch at the exact moment leading up to the student's death? Why was Kendrick visible going in, but never coming out? And why did it take weeks for his family to even get access to the footage? By now, the Johnsons had stopped trusting local law enforcement entirely. They were convinced that someone knew what really happened, and that people in power were helping keep it buried. But even as the case gained national attention, not everyone agreed with the family's version of events. And soon, a different narrative would emerge. One that would divide a community, the country, and even parts of the investigation itself. As the national attention grew, the case of Kendrick Johnson became more than a tragedy. It became a battleground of conflicting stories, public pressure, and unanswered questions. From the start, there were two main theories. The official theory that Kendrick died accidentally while reaching into the mat, and the family's belief that he was killed, and his death was staged to look like an accident. But underneath those two narratives, dozens of smaller theories began to spread. Some students told reporters about an altercation Kendrick had months earlier with another student, the son of a local FBI agent. Rumors claimed that the fight had reignited, that maybe there had been retaliation. The Johnson family believed this could be the key, but law enforcement dismissed it immediately. The two boys in question had solid alibis, they said, and were ruled out as suspects. But online, the story took on a life of its own. As the case gained traction on social media, people began examining every photo, every second of the gym footage, every supposed inconsistency in the reports. Internet detectives tried to reconstruct the crime scene themselves, but with so little reliable evidence released to the public, speculation filled the gaps. Then came the questions about the cover-up.
And I quote, "They're gonna catch me anyways. I should have never done this. I was young and stupid. Kendrick didn't deserve this, man." A couple of seconds go by, and he ends with a very tearful, "They're gonna catch me anyways."
The family says the audio was secretly recorded by the person's family member who sold it to them for $1,000.
The Johnsons accused local officials, including the sheriff's office, the GBI, and the school system, of protecting the sons of powerful families. They pointed to the missing organs, the untested blood, the missing footage. They said the town had closed ranks to protect its own. Law enforcement, in turn, accused the family of spreading misinformation. They argued that every piece of evidence pointed to an accident, and that the Johnsons' accusations were destroying reputations and dividing the community. At one point, tensions became so high that protests filled the streets of Valdosta. Students walked out of school in solidarity. The family marched to the courthouse demanding federal charges. They refused to stop until someone was held accountable. Then, in 2013, the U.S. Department of Justice opened its own review. For the Johnsons, it was a moment of hope, a sign that maybe, this time, the truth would finally come out. But even with the federal government involved, the questions only deepened. Why did key witnesses give conflicting statements? Why were so many pieces of evidence, from the blood-stained shoes to the tissues, never tested? And if this was truly an accident, why did it feel like every step toward transparency was met with resistance? By now, Kendrick's death had become more than a local case. It was a symbol, a mirror reflecting how young Black lives are often handled by systems meant to protect them. But while the public argued and the headlines shifted, the Johnson family kept pushing. And what they did next would force the world to look again. For most families, the story would have ended there, a ruling of accidental death, a closed file, and a lifetime of questions. But the Johnsons refused to let that happen. From the very beginning, Jacqueline and Kenneth Johnson vowed that their son's name would not fade quietly. They believed that Kendrick had been murdered and that his death had been covered up to protect someone with power. So they began to fight. They protested outside the Lowndes County Courthouse.
Hundreds of people with the organization Israel United in Christ took to the streets in downtown Atlanta demanding justice for Kendrick Johnson. His family says law enforcement has ruled their son's death an accident. Police say classmates at Lowndes High School in Valdosta found Kendrick Johnson's body in an upright rolled gym mat in January of 2013. The family says investigators say Johnson was reaching for his shoe in the mat when he got stuck, but Johnson's family believes someone killed him. The family filed a federal lawsuit against the GBI and Lowndes County Sheriff's Office last year. They were in Atlanta today to ask the Court of Appeals to take action.
They marched through the streets of Valdosta carrying posters with Kendrick's face. They gave interviews, demanded answers, and confronted officials who dismissed their pleas as conspiracy. Jacqueline once said, "You can't tell me my son died reaching for a shoe. My child was beaten, stuffed in that mat, and they think we'll just move on. We won't."
My feelings will always be the same about Kendrick. He's my son and I love him. You know, even after death, I'm going to continue to love him.
In 2013, the family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against local officials, the school, and the 2 students they believed were involved. The case drew more national attention, but it also brought backlash. The family faced harassment, online threats, and criticism from people who accused them of exploiting the tragedy for attention. Despite that, they kept going.
But we're in the process of still adding more to the team to continue the pursuit for justice for Kendrick, because we ain't gonna never stop. Like,
Of course.
there's nothing that nobody can do to make us stop, because our child didn't deserve none of this.
They hired new lawyers, demanded Kendrick's body be exhumed, and ordered a 3rd autopsy. Once again, the results showed signs of non-accidental blunt force trauma. Still, the official ruling remained unchanged. The Department of Justice spent nearly 3 years reviewing thousands of pages of reports, interviews, and forensic evidence. But in 2016, the DOJ announced it would not file any federal charges, saying there was insufficient evidence to prove foul play or a cover-up. For the Johnsons, it was a crushing blow. Years of fighting, of public pressure, of reliving their son's death over and over, and still no one was held accountable. But they didn't stop. In 2018, they refiled lawsuits. In 2021, the case was briefly reopened by the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office after new documents were submitted. But again, it was closed months later with the same conclusion: accidental death. Even now, Jacqueline and Kenneth Johnson continue to push for a new investigation. They've spent more than a decade fighting against a system that seems determined to outlast them. Their fight became about more than just their son. It became about a family who's ever been told to accept an answer that doesn't make sense. Every Black parent who's ever felt the system didn't see their child as worth the truth. Through marches, lawsuits, and heartbreak, the Johnsons made sure that Kendrick's name was never forgotten. More than a decade has passed since Kendrick Johnson's body was found in that high school gym, and yet the questions haven't gone away. In the years since his death, his name has become a rallying cry, not just in Georgia, but across the country. Artists, activists, and public figures have spoken his name during protests, at rallies, and online. The hashtag Justice for KJ became a digital memorial, a place where people demanded answers long after the headlines faded. Every few years, new claims surface, new photos, new documents, and each time the case is reopened, only to be closed again, the official ruling unchanged. But in the court of public opinion, the case of Kendrick Johnson represents something much larger. It's about what happens when a Black family's pain collides with the system built on dismissal. It's about how the words "no foul play" can sound like a verdict before an investigation even begins. And it's about the families who have to become their own investigators, their own advocates, their own media voices, just to be heard. For Valdosta, the case remains a scar. Some residents say it divided the town. Others say it exposed what was already there: a deep tension between truth, power, and race in America's Deep South. But for the Johnson family, it's simple. Their son was alive, then he wasn't. And the story they've been told doesn't fit the facts they've seen with their own eyes. Jacqueline Johnson once said, "They thought we'd get tired. They thought we'd give up. But every time I say my son's name, I bring him back to the light. And that's where he'll stay." Kendrick's case may never have the ending his family deserves. But because of them, his story is no longer hidden inside that gym. It's out in the open, a reminder and a warning that justice delayed isn't always justice denied, and it's always a wound that never fully heals. When Kendrick Johnson walked into Lowndes High School that January day, he couldn't have known he was stepping into history. Not the kind of history that gets celebrated, but the kind that forces a nation to look at itself. His death exposed more than one mystery. It exposed the gap between what justice promises and what it delivers. It showed how quickly a case can be labeled, closed, and filed away, even when something doesn't add up. For years, people have argued over what really happened to Kendrick. But behind every theory, every rumor, every headline, there's still a 17-year-old boy who should have gone home that night. A mother who still sets a place for him at the table. A father who still calls out his name in prayer. Maybe the truth has always been there, buried beneath the layers of denial and fear. Or maybe it's something that was taken with Kendrick himself. But what's certain is that his story still matters. Because stories like Kendrick's remind us that silence protects no one, and that justice doesn't belong only to those who can afford to fight for it. Kendrick Johnson, 17 years old, a son, a brother, a life that deserved more than a headline. This has been the Ebony Cases from the Icy Bridge Files, the death of Kendrick Johnson. Thank you for remembering with me. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and never forget, every story deserves to be told.